Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. And as Minister Krishna Bairagowda has said, if he is dealing with agriculture and therefore didn't think he was more appropriate to be here, but nevertheless did want to be here because he's also somewhere finding it relevant to talk about technology in agriculture. So was my hesitation to be here today, and in fact mentioned that it would have been more appropriate for Ravi Shankar Prasad to be here rather than me. But after all, ultimately when you're part of a council of ministers, you're not expected to live in a silo, and across the board you need to have that kind of a exposure and believe in taking up a cause which is going to, in the national interest, be of benefit for all of us. And therefore I ventured here. I'll certainly sound a novice, and I'm sure you will indulge in accommodating that kind of a layman's view of your sector. But certainly there are areas which I'd like to bring to your notice at this time when the industry has, as I see it, fairly big challenges to meet. And from the point of view of a commerce and industry person, and deriving the message from the Prime Minister, the lack of balance between the demand and supply of electronics in India is a matter of serious concern. Electronic goods account for the third biggest import that we do. It's crude oil first, gold next, and electronics the third. That wonderful figure of 400 billion has been referred to by quite a few of the speakers before me. Sounds big, but that's the demand. That's the size of the demand. If it was the size of the revenue, all of us are okay. But that's the size of the demand. And that should serve as a motivational force for us. If that's the size of the demand, we are importing almost 80% of it. Well, that's the size of projected demand. And if I look at actual figures of import, you may say, oh no, it's not meeting 80%, so don't exaggerate. I'll give in there. The quantum of imports, if I have to estimate it for 2017, is going to be about $30 billion. But what this 400 billion means to me is that's the market which is waiting to be served. And what is our capacity today? There are only about 3,500 manufacturing units, electronic manufacturing units. I wish their capacity can increase manifold. But 3,500 electronics manufacturing unit and about 1,25,000 smaller, tiny, nano, micro units which are serving these 35,000 units. All of which are important for me. I'm not downplaying their relevance. But look at the disproportionate, or look at the disconnect, if you want to put it that way. There should be much, much more of manufacturing in India of electronics. And recognizing that, worried about the disconnect, and also looking at the third largest import and therefore the bill which is going outside of the country, the Prime Minister has clearly said, look, we should do everything to make sure that this imbalance is redressed and we get it to zero. I'm really worried as to how we are going to reach it, but with the drive of the Prime Minister, I'm sure we'll reach that level sometime in the process. And for that, Is it that we are setting a target and just leaving it at? Is it that the government is saying, oh, this has to be reached and do what you want? No, certainly not. Again, before I go into what the government is doing, I'll also want to say the National Electronics Policy, I'm sure all of you are an authority on it, but I'm just taking two important elements from it. The National Electronics Policy wants 100 billion investment in this sector. Very well said, and there is potential for it. And with that kind of drawing of investment, they also aim to create about 28 million jobs, which we desperately need, and we have the manpower for it, we have the qualified manpower for it. But just to give you again a reality check, between 2000 and 2014-15, we've had only 1.53 billion coming in as investment in this sector. What are we aiming at? 100 billion. What has this government done about easing it? Easing the flow of money to come in because there's potential, there's enough manpower, the government is bringing in a policy which can help investment in this sector. We've brought in, through the automatic route, 100% FDI into the sector. We've said bring in money, 100% we'll allow, but that goes through the automatic route, so it's easier too. So we've opened it up. And together with this, the other policy, this is the National Electronics Policy. I've just taken one bit of it. And the other policy which is relevant to me is the National Manufacturing Policy. And the National Manufacturing Policy at this stage says manufacturing and its contribution to the GDP is only about 12%. This country had a second 5-year plan which focused only on manufacturing. The first 5-year plan was on agriculture. Krishna Bhairao Garuda would speak much more about it than I can. And it benefited. You brought in the Green Revolution. Subsequently, you made sure that irrigation was reaching to every land. Whole lot of things happened at that time, and Indian agriculture could, rise up. Otherwise, you were looking at that horrible PL 420 or something where even food had to come into this country. Today, I'm glad to say that situation is overcome. And similarly, the second 5-year plan looked at manufacturing. But after that, we've just allowed it to be where it should be, and then that's it. And as a result, this country's contribution to its own GDP from manufacturing has not really been observed. And today, when you look at it, it's just about 12 to 14% and not more than that. Whilst even today, nearly 45 to 50% of our population depends on agriculture, and that's unsustainable. What is agriculture's contribution again to our GDP? That is disproportionate to the number of people who are dependent on agriculture. Where are these people going to come out? This underemployed lot who are sitting in agriculture should be drawn out so that agriculture becomes efficient. Those underemployed people have to be brought out to something else. And Bangalore, and particularly I'm talking to the electronics sector, obviously the service sector, which is predominantly the IT-enabled services largely, contributes more than 50% to our GDP. It contributes 50% to our GDP, but its contribution to job creation is disproportionately low. If agriculture is sustaining 60%, 50% of people, the sector that is talking about contributing and increasingly contributing to the GDP, which is the services sector, as I said, dominated by IT-enabled services, don't employ as many as they should for the size they're contributing to the GDP, but that's the nature of that animal. You can't do anything about it. So where does this opportunity lie for both the private and the public sector to create the jobs? It is in manufacturing. Big or small, medium size, whatever, SME, anything. And therefore, the manufacturing policy, which aims at increasing that contribution from 12%, 12 to 14% to 25% by 2022, has to look at the way in which money can be brought in, investment can be increased, and with investment, job creation. And what did I say about the national electronic policy? Wants 100 billion to come in for a creation of 28 million jobs. Very well, every job created is important. And therefore, for all this, with this sector in mind, adding to the demand, which is already estimated to be about 400 billion, and rightly so, is the national knowledge network that we are talking about. National optical fiber network that we are talking about. The giving of tablets to educational institutions that we are talking about. The digitization program that we are talking about. The broadband push that the government is talking about. All this is definitely going to generate more demand. So, the net, or I am building my arguments saying we want job creation, but we also have this disconnect between how much we want in electronics as demand and how much we are able to service. The disconnect is growing. And what are we up against? A very well established ecosystem which is already prevalent in China. A very cost effective system which is growing and has made a mark in Vietnam. And again, a very cost effective and efficient system which is coming up in Indonesia, which is really giving a run for our money. ASEAN, quietly, a lot of things are happening in ASEAN countries. So this is what we are against. This is what we are up against in terms of how you're going to meet this challenge. First of all, to meet your own domestic demand, and then to be able to export. Now I'm sure all of you are begging to ask this question. It's all right, stop this lecture, tell me what the government is doing about it. 10,000 crores is what the government has announced as fund for helping out in the name of subsidies. When you're establishing an SEZ, you get about 20% subsidy on the capital goods expenditure. And if it's a non-SEZ, you get about 25%. Similarly, the government is trying to establish semiconductor manufacturing clusters. And in that again, clusters which are greenfield get about 50 crores, up to about 100 acres. For every 100 acres, about 50 crores. And again for greenfield is about 50 crores for every 100 acres, and for brownfield it's about 75% of its cost, not crossing 50 crores. That also is being given. The government again has kept an outlay of 10 billion for creating 2 semiconductor manufacturing units. So from the government side, you're certainly having money come in, but more important is the ecosystem and the creation of the ecosystem which we want to recognize and also help out